Good morning. My name is Reverend Dr. Ron Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to the Center for Spiritual Living Space Coast Sunday morning service. You don't know this, but we do. You're watching Take 6. So I hope the rest of it goes better than the first part did. But I'd like to begin by introducing my beautiful wife, Becky, who is back by popular demand after taking a 1-week hiatus. But she's here now to open us with what I know will be an absolutely beautiful prayer. So, Becky.
So I just invite all of us to turn within to that place of the Most High, where each one of us is knowing our oneness in divine spirit. And as we take in the deep breaths, each breath is reminding us that it is the breath of God, the breath of spirit, this divine higher power that is always surrounding us with its good. And I'm knowing my oneness in infinite spirit, that it is the divine essence of who and what I am. It is always expressing through me, as me, and for me. And I'm knowing this for each person. That in gratitude and from this heartfelt place, I am realizing that this morning is filled with joy, it is filled with love and laughter. I'm knowing that divine intelligence is right here expressing itself through Reverend Dr. Ron's message. That its divine energy is guiding and directing Reverend Ron this morning as his message is unfolding in divine order, divine perfection, as is today. Today is perfect. It is whole. It is complete. And I'm knowing this to be so for each person who is viewing this morning, that each one of us is whole, perfect, and complete. And so I give thanks. I give thanks for this awareness. I release this prayer into the love and into the law, knowing that it is done, it is perfect, it is whole, and so it is.
Thank you, Becky. So I need to begin today by apologizing to somebody. Last week, I began my message with a quote from Meister Eckhart, and I said that Meister Eckhart was born in the year 1260, which is 2 years later than one of our congregants, Carol Gabica, was born. Well, Carol sent me a very angry text after she heard the talk and said that I was 2 years off, that she was actually born the same year that Meister Eckhart was born. And so I just want to apologize to Carol by making her 2 years older than she actually was. And I actually took the time this week to subtract it out. I hadn't done that, and realized that Carol is 760 years old. And when I told Becky I had done that, Becky was totally stunned. And I said, "Why are you surprised?" And she said, 760 years old. Ron, she doesn't look a day over 600 to me. So anyway, Carol, I'm sorry I jib-jatted 2 years. I'm sure you'll let me know. So my topic today is the guiding light. I want to speak about the inner voice, the inner wisdom of spirit. And I want to begin with a quote from Ernest Holmes, who wrote, "It is a beautiful and true thought to realize that every one of us stands in the shadow of a mighty mind, a pure intelligence, and a divine givingness." So Dr. Holmes is telling us, the way I interpret this, that we stand in this shadow and this divine intelligence, this mighty mind. One of the beauties of existence is we can use it. We can tap into it. We can team up with it. And it speaks to us when we take the time to listen. You know, Ralph Waldo Trine was a contemporary of Ernest Holmes, and he wrote that when we open ourselves to this divine mind, it manifests itself in and through us. And he said the Shakespeare quote, "To thine own self be true," it means to be true to your soul, for it is through your soul that God speaks to you. It is our interior guide. Some call it that still small voice, and some of us call it intuition. Really doesn't matter what we call it, but it's there. It's there to guide us. It's there to lead us, and it's there to love us. So I thought this morning I would talk about how some of the different faith traditions view wisdom and divine guidance. And the late Rabbi Shani Labowitz says that wisdom is a way of life, that when our thinking is aligned with spirit, we come to know the truth. And I thought about that, and I thought another way to look at it is we can substitute the word authenticity for truth. They're meaning the same in this context, that when we allow ourselves to go deep and to listen to spirit, we hear the truth, but we also see with great authenticity who we are. It's this power that helps us to grow, to move beyond our limitations. And when we recognize the truth, we know that we're living in the essence of spirit. When we think heavenly thoughts, we're lifted up. You know, and it reminded me of a story that I read by Rachel Remen, and she was doing counseling with a patient who had cancer, and he said, I want to tell you a story, Rachel. And he tells her a story about the Hindu god and goddess Shakti and Shiva and Shakti. And they're looking down on the world, and one day Shakti sees a poor man walking down a road. His clothes are dirty and ripped. His shoes, his sandals are tied on with rope, and he just looks really miserable. And Shakti says to Shiva, "Please throw down a bag of gold for him." And Shiva says, "I can't do it." And Shakti says, but you're all powerful. Surely you can. And he says, "But I can't because he's not ready to receive it." And she pleads with her husband to do it. So he does. He throws down a bag of gold on this person's path. Now shift to what the person is thinking as he goes down his road. He's thinking to himself, "I wonder if I'll find something to eat today. I wonder if I'll go hungry tonight. I don't know." And he turns around a corner and he sees what looks like a rock in his path. And he goes, "Oh, look at that rock. I better walk around it." And he thinks, "Lucky thing I saw it. I could have stubbed my toe and ripped my sandals." And Rachel, when she hears that, says to her patient, "You know, sometimes life throws us a bag of gold that looks more like a bag of coal. What bag of gold did life throw you that looked like a bag of coal?" And the patient says to her, "Why, Rachel, my cancer, of course. I thought you'd guess." And I think there's a lot of different morals to that story. But for now, to me, for this message, one of them is having wisdom and divine guidance is to know the difference between a bag of gold and a bag of coal. Carolyn Mays wrote a book called Entering the Castle. And I'll tell you a little bit more about it in a minute. But one of the things she relates there is she once heard somebody asked a holy man, what is the greatest gift we can give the world? And his response was, a fully healthy you. And Carolyn initially thought, what a silly answer. But she doesn't think that anymore. And I thought when I read that, when he said a fully healthy you, he didn't mean just physically. He meant physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Think about this. And Carolyn asked this question. What would our world be like if we were all fully healthy? If we were all able to live with unending love? If we were able to live with compassion? If we were able to be forgiving? What a wonderful world we would create. Well, the book Entering the Castle is about Teresa of Avila. And the castle, entering the castle, is entering within, going within. And Carolyn says that Teresa lived with 5 basic rules of inner and external life. And I just want to touch on all 5. Her first one is don't be judgmental. She said, you know, we're all so quick to be judgmental, but we don't know what's going on in somebody else's life when they hurt us or when they're hurt or whatever they are. We don't know what's happening to them. So anytime we judge, we're in error. Her second rule is never envy the experiences of others. And she says, you know, envy reveals a lack of humility. And when we envy others, we hurt our soul. Her third rule is everything good about you comes from God. They're all gifts. Our talents, our skills, our abilities. And she says, so don't take credit for them. Don't take credit. Don't fuel your ego by taking credit for them. And don't misuse them. Focus on the fact that God is your source. Her fourth rule is remain humble. Don't look for praise, because praise can fuel your insecurities. You know, she said, if we look for praise, we worry. What if it stops? What is my life going to be like? What if I lose a gift and people don't praise me? She said, rather than looking for praise externally, look for inner guidance. And I think her fifth rule is why Teresa is a saint and most of us aren't, because this one I think really separates. She says, develop appreciation for those who criticize you. That isn't easy. She said, don't resent them. Look at them as sacred. And remember, you have criticized others. And I want to read to you a prayer that's Teresa's entry prayer, the entry into our sacred self. She wrote, I crossed the bridge into the silent bliss of my castle. I closed the drawbridge and forbid all outside influences from entry into this holy place that is my soul. Here in my castle, I am alone with God. Under God's light and companionship, I discover the depth and beauty of my soul. I embrace the power of prayer. I open myself to divine guidance. I surrender myself to become a channel for grace, healing, and service as God directs my life. Isn't that a beautiful prayer? Eric Butterworth, in one of his books, writes about someone who's called into his boss's office and after 20 years of working for the company, is fired. He goes back to his desk and he broods. He feels useless and he feels fearful about his financial future. And he looks down, and under his desk, he sees a spider making its web. And he watches as it spins and spins. And he thinks to himself, if this creature can get into the flow of life, why can't I? And he thinks about it some more, and he realizes that his good doesn't come to him. His good comes through him. And he thinks to himself, I might not get my old job back, but maybe I can get something better. And Butterworth writes that the fellow liked to write, so he begins writing. And Butterworth says he didn't become a Hemingway, but his writing was good enough that he was able to sell a lot of what he wrote. And he did really well financially and was able to retire very comfortably, all because he got into the flow of life. You know, Jesus said, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Free from the thoughts of the outside world. And even knowing that truth, it may be difficult to live. You know, if everybody else is going left and internally you get the message go right, that's hard to do it. If everybody's going up and you get the message go down, get out of your comfort zone, that's hard. But the truth is, when we listen to it, we're free to let God be God in us, free to get into the flow of life. That's what Emerson meant when he said we must unlearn the wisdom of the world. We need to learn to trust our internal messages, even when they may be scary, even when they may push us out of our comfort zone. We are so used to looking outside for our guidance and to be led. But we can learn through practice to listen to that still small voice. And how do we do it? We can start, Ernest Holmes tells us, start wherever you are. Start small and build your way up. You know, I've used this example before, but I began my own business and I had this internal knowing that that was my right path and I would do well. And all the people, and I mean literally everyone I knew in the business world, told me I would fail, told me I wouldn't do well, told me not only that, you'll never get a job in the corporate world again because people will say, well, he left it, he must have liked it, why should we hire him? I only had one person besides myself that believed in me, and that was Becky, my wife. And I'll just say, they were the best financial years of my life. And I loved doing what I did. It wasn't the easiest thing in the world to follow the internal guidance and shut out all of the noise from the outside, but it was well worth doing it. Marcel Proust once wrote, we don't receive wisdom, we must discover it for ourselves. After a journey, no one can take for us or spare us. So let's talk about wisdom. And I want to begin with a blog by Paulo Coelho. And I'm just going to read it verbatim, okay? Somebody says to him, I don't know what you mean by wisdom. And he says, someone once asked me, what do you want to be your epitaph? I answered, I will be cremated. But if I ever had an epitaph, it would be Paulo Coelho died while he was alive. And the person said to him, "Why this epitaph? Everyone else dies when he or she is alive." I said, "No, this is not true. If the same pattern is repeated over and over again, you are not alive anymore. To die alive is to take risks, to pay your price, to do something that sometimes scares you, but you should do because you may like or you may not like. I don't believe suicide is an option, but we have to die several times in this life in order to understand it. To die in this sense is to get rid of old values, to move for a place that we don't know, that we don't feel secure, but at least will give us joy." I think that's another way to look at making wise choices. You know, wisdom, it's not about knowledge. It's not about your age. I read a study where they tried to measure knowledge, and they found as many knowledgeable people at 30 as they did at 60. Wisdom isn't about your IQ, and it's not about how well you did in school. We develop wisdom through our life lessons. We develop wisdom when we see life as gray and not as black and white. We develop wisdom when we're willing to challenge the status quo. You know, not being together is really difficult. I love all of you, and I'd love to be there hugging and spending time having coffee and just sharing with each other. And unfortunately now we can't do that. But I will say, I want to tell you some things I read from Lama Surya Das this week. And I thought to myself, oh, if we were only together, we could have some great discussions on some questions he asks. So let me tell you some of what he asks, and maybe we could think about it this week. He said, what would it be like to be wise? Think about that. What would it be like to be wise? What would it be like to be able to distinguish true from false, right from wrong, real from unreal? And then he asked the question that I really thought a lot about. He said, do you know anyone you consider wise? Do you know anyone you consider wise? I would love to be able to discuss that with you. And maybe Tuesday when we do our call, we can chat about that. And not only who we do, but why we do. So I read an article by New Century Foundation this week. And they talk about, you know, you can read books. You can look at spiritual masters. You can go to all kinds of conferences, but that won't make you spiritually wise. Spiritual wisdom is gained through experiences and what we learn from those experiences. Spiritual wisdom is being tested through difficult times. It's from facing loss and disappointment. It comes from a lifetime of experiences when we reach inside ourselves. All of the wisdom that we seek is within. And there was a quote in there from a spiritual master who said, I'm not a teacher, I'm a reminder. And I took that to mean she doesn't need to teach us anything. She just needs to remind us whatever we need to know, we carry with us. It's right here within. We're so much more than we think we are. And it led me, I know I've told this story before, but it led me to another Rachel Remen story about a young psychiatry intern who comes and asks her if he could sit in on one of her sessions, and she says sure. And the session he sits in on is a young former gangbanger who's all tattooed up, and he's telling Rachel how much he loves his young wife who's dying from cancer. And he tells Rachel how much he loves her and how he never realized how much love he had within him and how she brings it out and how he adores her. And Rachel at some point looked beyond him to the young intern, and she saw he had put down his pen and pad and tears were coming down his eyes. And at the end of the session, after the couple had left, Rachel said to him, "Did you learn anything today?" And he said yes. And she said, "Tell me what?" And he said, "I learned we're all more than we seem." If we were together today, I would ask you to look around and remember, we are all more than we seem. I want to close with the final conclusion, as Ernest Holmes called it in our textbook. In conclusion, what the world needs is spiritual conviction, followed by spiritual experience. I would rather see a student of this science prove his principle than to have him repeat all the words of wisdom that have ever been uttered. It is far easier to teach the truth than to practice it. But the practice of truth is personal to each, and in the long run, no one can live our life for us. To each is given what he needs, and the gifts of heaven come alike to all. How shall we use the gifts is all that matters. To hold one's thoughts steadfastly, to be constructive, to that which endures, and to the truth, may not be easy in a rapidly changing world, but to the one who makes the attempt, much is guaranteed. The essence of spiritual mind healing and of all true religious philosophy is an inner realization of the presence of perfection within and around about. It is the hope of heaven, the voice of God proclaiming, "I am that which thou art. Thou art that which I am." Thank you for watching. God bless you. I love you all.